Dr. Lyra adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the data display in front of her. The Xerax ship, with its sleek, metallic design, hovered above Earth, just outside the planet's atmosphere. For weeks, the research team had been preparing for this mission, ready to study humanity, one of the most curious species in the galaxy. The Xerax were known throughout the universe for their scientific expertise, and the opportunity to study humans was seen as a great honor. It was a chance to unravel the mysteries of a species that had somehow managed to thrive on a planet filled with danger. Lyra was excited, but also a little nervous. She had studied many species throughout her career, but nothing quite like humans. Their biology was different, their emotions unpredictable, and their evolutionary history a puzzle. She had always wondered how a species so physically fragile had managed to dominate their world. Today, she was going to find out. The team had set up a research facility in the middle of the Earth's largest continent, a place where the humans had agreed to cooperate. The humans, surprisingly, had welcomed the Xerax with open arms, eager to learn more about the alien species and share their own knowledge in return. It was a historic moment for both sides. The humans had their suspicions, but for the most part, they trusted the Xerax to be honest. After all, that Xerax had never shown any aggressive intent. Lyra stepped into the main laboratory, where her colleagues were already preparing for the first human interaction. They were ready to begin the study of human anatomy, focusing on their biological systems. A male volunteer had already been selected, a seemingly average human, willing to assist in their research. "Dr. Lyra, we're ready," a voice called out from the control room. Lyra nodded and made her way to the observation room, where the human male, who introduced himself as John, was waiting. He was sitting on a table, looking slightly nervous but calm. The volunteers had been told they would undergo physical examinations, but John wasn't sure what to expect from the Xerax. Lyra took a moment to observe him. He was about average height, with brown hair and eyes. His skin, though not as resilient as Xerax skin, appeared to be healthy. She noted the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted himself on the table. It was an interesting contrast. The humans, despite their physical weaknesses, seemed to have a deep sense of curiosity about everything, even their own biology. "Hello, John," Lyra said in a voice that was both soothing and professional. "We'll be conducting a few simple tests today. I'm sure you've been briefed on the procedure." John nodded, though his eyes flickered with uncertainty. He had been told the tests would be non-invasive, but still, the idea of alien researchers studying his body made him uneasy. The last thing he expected was for these beings to be so interested. "Do you have any questions before we begin?" Lyra asked. "No," John replied. "I trust you." Lyra smiled, though there was an air of calm professionalism in her demeanor. She motioned for him to lie back, and the research began. The team had planned to conduct a full biological examination, from the respiratory system to the cardiovascular system, to gain a complete understanding of human biology. The focus was on understanding their weaknesses and strengths, their survival mechanisms, and how they managed to adapt to such a diverse planet. As Lyra worked through the various tests, she found herself fascinated by how fragile yet resilient humans were. Their bodies seemed to be designed to withstand so much disease, injury, emotional stress, and yet they were so easily affected by their environment. Their bodies could heal, but the process was slower than the Xerax's incredibly fast cellular regeneration. But as she moved on to the next part of the examination, Lyra encountered something unexpected. She had been told that all human males had the same basic reproductive anatomy. Yet when she began her observations, she was taken aback. There was something about the male's body that didn't match the usual reports from their studies. The growth between his legs was unlike anything Lyra had seen before. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a simple anomaly. But as she focused on it more, she realized it wasn't an anomaly at all. This was something unique to humans. Lyra felt a ripple of confusion. Her mind raced, trying to process the data. The growth seemed alive, responding in ways that didn't make sense with the rest of the biological systems she had studied. It didn't follow the normal rules of anatomy. This was new, unexpected, and deeply fascinating. "Something wrong, Dr. Lyra?" one of her colleagues asked, noticing her hesitation. "No, nothing's wrong," Lyra replied quickly, her voice steady. "But this is unexpected. I need to perform additional scans." Her curiosity had been piqued. The human male's body was far more complex than she had ever anticipated. What was this growth? Why was it reacting the way it was? Lyra knew she had only scratched the surface of a much larger mystery, and she was determined to uncover its secrets. As she ordered more scans, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement building within her. This was just the beginning. The study of humanity was going to be far more interesting than she had ever imagined. Dr. Lyra sat at her desk, staring at the results of the scans. The data was right there in front of her, everything she had expected. And yet, one thing stood out. It was the human male's reproductive system. The growth she had noticed earlier was not a simple biological feature, not at all. She couldn't explain it using the principles of alien biology she had been trained in. It was different. The Exirac species had studied many life forms across the galaxy, and their understanding of anatomy was second to none. They had encountered various reproductive systems on different planets, but nothing like this. Humans, despite their seemingly fragile forms, had something extraordinary between their legs, a feature that reacted in a way no other species' anatomy had ever done before. The growth was pliable, almost alive in a way that shouldn't have been possible. It responded to stimuli that Lyra couldn't yet fully understand. Lyra felt a knot in her stomach. She had always prided herself on her scientific knowledge. But now, faced with this puzzle, she had to admit that she didn't have all the answers. She needed more data, more observations. She turned to her research assistant, a younger Xerax named Thal, who had been helping her with the scans. "Thal, I need you to run the scans again, focusing on the neural connections in the human's body, specifically the area around the growth. There's something happening here that doesn't follow standard biological processes," Lyra ordered, her voice sharp with curiosity. Thal nodded, immediately setting to work. Lyra watched him, her mind racing. What was it about humans that made them so different? This growth, this thing that shouldn't exist in any logical biological system, was proof that there was something extraordinary going on inside their bodies. She couldn't help but wonder if it was more than just biology. Was it something connected to their minds, their emotions? As Thal worked on the scans, Lyra went over her previous notes, trying to find any connection she had missed. She thought about the human male's behavior, his reactions during the examination. John had shown an unusual level of emotional response during the procedure, even in ways that didn't seem linked to the physical tests. His body had reacted to her presence, to her touch, in a way that suggested a much deeper connection between mind and body than she had expected. Human anatomy was fascinating, yes, but their emotional connection to their physical being seemed to be at the heart of it. It wasn't just that their bodies worked, it was how they worked together with their emotions. Lyra had always thought emotions were a weak point in any species, but with humans, they appeared to be a strength. The scans came back quickly, but the results only added to Lyra's confusion. The neural pathways connected to the growth were far more complex than anything she had seen before. In fact, the entire system seemed to operate on a level of synchronization that was unheard of in Xerax physiology. It was almost as though the human body had learned to adapt, not just to external threats, but to its own internal environment. This adaptability was remarkable. But the more Lyra looked, the more questions piled up. The growth appeared to respond not just to physical touch, but to emotional states. The readings suggested that when John felt anxious or excited, the growth shifted, becoming more flexible and even changing size. It was a response she had never seen before, and it was unlike anything in the Xerax biological database. "Dr. Lyra, The scans are complete. Thal's voice broke into her thoughts. The neural pathways are. They're unlike anything we've encountered before. It's almost as if the growth is connected to the human's entire nervous system. The responses, they don't fit our usual definitions of biology. Lyra stared at the results, her mind racing. The human male's body was like nothing she had studied before. And it wasn't just physical. There was something deeply psychological at play. The growth didn't just serve a biological function. It seemed to be intertwined with the human's emotions, his thoughts, and his sense of identity. She began to realize that the human's physical form wasn't the only thing that was fascinating. Their minds, their emotions, were deeply tied to their bodies. The growth wasn't just an organ. It was a physical representation of the human's ability to adapt, to grow, to change according to emotional needs. It was an adaptive feature, something designed for survival, and it was unlike anything she had ever seen. But why? Why would such a feature evolve in this species? Lyra was determined to find out. "Prepare the subject for further testing," she said firmly, though she felt a strange unease in her chest. She knew she was about to enter uncharted territory. The truth was, Lyra wasn't just studying human biology anymore. She was starting to study the human spirit. And that, she realized, might be even more extraordinary than the body itself. As she walked toward the examination room, she felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. This wasn't just science anymore. It was something deeper, something that would change her understanding of life itself. Dr. Lyra couldn't stop thinking about the human male's growth. The more she examined the data, the more questions arose. It was as if she had stumbled upon a biological secret that even her advanced HFY knowledge couldn't explain. The scans, the reactions, nothing made sense according to the rules she had learned. And what troubled her most was that the growth wasn't just a passive feature. It seemed almost sentient. Her mind kept returning to the emotional responses it triggered in the human subject, John. The way his body reacted to his own emotions and to her presence was baffling. It wasn't just a physical response. It was tied to something deeper, something beyond biology. It felt like the human body had its own language, one she couldn't quite understand. "Dr. Lyra, you need to see this," Thal said urgently, snapping her out of her thoughts. Lyra rushed to the research station, where Thal was monitoring the new set of scans. She leaned over his shoulder, looking at the data on the screen. The neural pathways surrounding the growth were now more defined, and the reactions were even more pronounced than before. But what caught Lyra's attention was the spike in activity during the moments when John had expressed emotions like fear or excitement. The growth seemed to respond to these emotions in ways that no other part of the body did. It wasn't just a reaction to physical stimuli, like touch or pressure. It was connected to the subject's mental and emotional state. Lyra had studied countless life forms, but never before had she encountered such a complex relationship between mind and body. "What does it mean?" Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was starting to feel the weight of her confusion, and her scientific curiosity had begun to blend with something deeper. Was she truly studying a biological anomaly, or was there something about human emotion that defied everything the Xerax believed? "I don't know," Thal admitted, his tone uneasy. "The scans are showing patterns, but they don't make sense. It's almost as though the growth is alive, but not in the way we understand life." Lyra's mind raced. The term alive wasn't used lightly among the Xerax. They believed in objective science, in precise definitions. To consider that something as simple as a part of the human body could be alive in the way that plants or animals were, it didn't fit into their worldview. She turned to the human male, who was sitting quietly in the examination room. He seemed relaxed, but there was a flicker of nervousness in his eyes as he looked at her. John had grown increasingly aware of the intense focus of the Xerax researchers. He had known about the studies, of course, but the attention was becoming too personal. The growth had been the topic of conversation among the Xerax team, and he couldn't help but feel exposed. "John," Lyra said softly, trying to keep her voice calm. "We need to continue the testing, but this time, We'll need your cooperation. It's important that you try to relax and let your emotions flow naturally." John hesitated. The thought of exposing his emotions to these alien beings made him uncomfortable, but something about Lyra's tone told him she was genuinely trying to understand, not exploit. He nodded slowly and took a deep breath. Lyra observed closely. As John focused on his breathing, the growth responded. It shifted slightly, expanding and contracting. But what struck Lyra was the pattern of movement. It was not simply a biological function. It seemed to mirror his state of mind. When he relaxed, the growth calmed. When his thoughts turned to something stressful, it reacted by becoming more pronounced, almost like it was reacting to the emotional tension in his body. Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. Could it be? Could this part of the body actually be tied to something as complex as human emotions, as if it were a bridge between the mind and the physical world? For the first time, Lyra began to feel a shift inside herself. She had always prided herself on her objective approach to science, but now the very nature of her research was challenging everything she had ever known. How could something so seemingly simple, this growth between a human's legs, be connected to something as intangible as emotions? She turned to Thal, who was watching the scans closely. His face mirrored the same sense of disbelief. "This can't be right," he said quietly. "It's as if the growth is responding to him, to his feelings. But how is that possible?" Lyra remained silent for a moment, her mind racing. She had never expected this. The human body, simple in some ways, seemed to be a vast universe of its own, with complexities she couldn't yet understand. And as she looked at John, she realized that she wasn't just studying his biology anymore. She was uncovering a mystery of the human spirit, something that connected the mind, body, and emotions in a way that was unique, beautiful, and powerful. "We need to dig deeper," Lyra said, her voice filled with a new sense of urgency. "This is not just about biology. It's about the human experience itself. We need to understand how this works and why it's so connected to their emotions." John sat there, unaware of the profound shift happening in Lyra's understanding of humanity. But he could sense that something was changing. The Tesseract were no longer just studying his body. They were beginning to realize that there was something extraordinary about the human spirit, and they were starting to understand just how powerful it could be. As the days passed, Dr. Lyra's fascination with the human male's anatomy grew. Every test she ran, every scan she examined, led her further into uncharted territory. The growth, as her team had begun calling it, was no longer just a strange physical feature. It was an enigma, something that felt almost personal. The way it responded to John's emotions was unlike anything the Tesseract had ever encountered. At first, Lyra had thought the growth was simply a unique biological trait, something that could be easily categorized. But as she continued to study it, she began to feel something else, a deep curiosity that went beyond science. It was as if she were standing on the edge of a great mystery, one that held the key to understanding not just the human body, but the human soul. "Dr. Lyra, we need to talk," Thal said, his voice sounding unusually tense as he approached her in the research lab. "The latest scans show something we weren't expecting. It's affecting the subject's emotional state." Lyra turned, concern flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean? The growth? How could it affect his emotions?" "It's not just the growth," Thal said, shaking his head. "It's the whole system. His emotional state is beginning to influence the rest of his biology. I've never seen anything like it before. The readings suggest that his body is becoming more attuned to his feelings, and it's spreading. It's like his emotions are now controlling more of his physical functions than we initially thought." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. The implications were staggering. She had suspected that the connection between the mind and body was stronger in humans than in the Tesseract, but this was something far more intense than she had imagined. What kind of species had such an intricate link between their emotions and their physiology? The Tesseract were known for their precise control over their bodies, but they had never developed such a personal, emotional connection to their biology. "We need to see this for ourselves," Lyra said quickly, standing up from her desk. "Get John ready for another round of tests." John had begun to notice the increasing focus of the Exarax on him. At first, he had been nervous about being studied by such advanced beings, but he had trusted their promise of scientific neutrality. However, with each test, he started to feel more like a specimen in a cage. The Exarax were kind to him, but he could sense their growing curiosity, which made him uncomfortable. When Lyra and Thal entered the room, John sat on the examination table, looking at them with a mixture of curiosity and unease. "John, we need to run some new tests," Lyra said, her voice calm but tinged with urgency. "Please relax. The more relaxed you are, the more accurate our results will be." John hesitated, but the tone in Lyra's voice reassured him. He took a deep breath and tried to calm his nerves. He had no idea what the Exarax were studying now, but something about their interest in him felt different. As he relaxed, he felt a strange sensation wash over him, as though his body and mind were being drawn into a deeper awareness of what was happening. It wasn't just the physical tests. The Exarax were trying to understand something deeper, something about his feelings. As John focused on staying calm, Lyra observed closely. The growth responded, as it always did, but now something new happened. It wasn't just reacting. It seemed to be shifting with his emotions. As John's heartbeat slowed, the growth became less pronounced. But when his thoughts drifted to memories of stress or worry, the growth reacted by becoming more active, almost as if it were mirroring his emotions. Lyra's eyes widened in shock. This was unlike anything she had expected. The growth wasn't just a passive organ. It was an active part of John's emotional experience. It was as if his body was reflecting his mind in real time. Thal's voice broke through the silence. "The readings are off the scale. Dr. Lyra, the growth is becoming even more sensitive. It's almost like the subject's emotions are controlling its state." Lyra looked at the data, her mind racing. This couldn't just be a biological feature anymore. This was something deeper, something that connected the human male's mental and physical states in a way that no other species had ever done before. The more she studied, the more she realized that the human body and mind were not two separate things. They were interconnected in ways that made the Exarax seem cold and mechanical in comparison. John, feeling the intensity of the tests, began to grow more nervous. His emotions were being read like an open book, and it made him feel vulnerable. The more the Exarax probed, the more he realized that this wasn't just a study of his body. It was a study of his very being. They were seeing parts of him that even he didn't fully understand. As the tests continued, Lyra found herself at a crossroads. She had started this mission with the goal of understanding human biology. Now it seemed as though the study had taken a more personal turn. She had learned so much about the human body, but she was beginning to realize that what made humans truly unique wasn't their biology. It was their emotional depth. The connection between their mind and body was far more intricate and powerful than anything the Exarax had ever encountered. She felt a strange empathy for John, something she hadn't expected. This wasn't just a subject anymore. He was a person, and his emotions were an integral part of his identity. The more she studied him, the more she realized how little the Exarax understood about the complexities of life. "Stop the tests," Lyra said suddenly, her voice firm. "We've gathered enough data for now." Thal looked at her in surprise. "But Dr. Lyra, the data." "I don't care about the data," she interrupted. "We've learned something far more important. We need to approach this differently. We need to understand the human mind, not just their body." For the first time since the mission began, Lyra felt a shift in her perspective. She wasn't just a scientist anymore. She was starting to see humanity in a way that no alien ever had. The Exarax were known for their intellect, but this human growth had revealed something far more profound: the power of emotion, the strength of the human spirit. And that was something no alien science could explain. The days had become a blur for Dr. Lyra. The more she thought about the recent discoveries, the more unsettled she felt. She had come to study the human body, yet what she had uncovered was something much more elusive. The growth, once just a curious anomaly, had become a window into the very essence of human beings. Emotions, thoughts, and physicality, all intertwined in ways that defied logic. Lyra sat in the quiet of her lab, looking over the scans and data once more. John's body was not just a machine responding to stimuli. It was a complex web of interconnected systems that worked in harmony, and at the center of it all was this growth, a living, responsive part of him, both physical and emotional. It wasn't just about biology anymore. It was about understanding what made humans who they were. Thal had been quiet lately, ever since Lyra had ordered the tests to stop. He seemed confused, perhaps even frustrated. But Lyra had been struggling with her own thoughts. Every time she looked at John, something shifted in her perception. It wasn't just about scientific curiosity. It felt personal now. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Thal standing at the door of her lab. "Dr. Lyra, I need to talk to you about something," Thal said, his voice more serious than usual. "I've been running simulations on human emotional states, trying to understand the patterns better. The results are concerning." Lyra motioned for him to sit down. "What's wrong?" "The emotional responses we've been seeing in John, specifically how they influence his physiology, are more than we anticipated," Thal began. "The connection between his mind and body is deeper than we thought. It's affecting his hormonal balance, his neural patterns. If we continue this research, we might be altering his natural state. I'm starting to worry about the long-term effects." Lyra paused, absorbing his words. She had felt a growing unease over the past few days, but hearing Thal's concerns made it even clearer. They were tampering with something that wasn't just a scientific curiosity anymore. It was a living, breathing part of a person. And by studying it, they might be changing it. "I know," she said quietly, "but we can't stop now. We need to understand this, Thal. This isn't just about human biology. It's about something far more important. We've uncovered a new aspect of life itself." Thal looked uncertain. "But what if we're crossing a line? What if we're doing more harm than good?" Lyra met his gaze, her expression serious. "I'm not sure, but I can't turn away now. I need to know what this means for both the human race and for us." Thal fell silent, nodding slowly. He understood, though he didn't entirely agree. Lyra could see the conflict in his eyes, but it was clear that their journey into this unknown territory had already begun. Later that day, Lyra entered the examination room, where John was waiting. He seemed more nervous than usual, his eyes flickering between the door and the chair where he was instructed to sit. The Exarax had become increasingly focused on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling of being a specimen under a microscope. "John, I know this isn't easy," Lyra said gently, approaching him. "But I need you to trust me. We're trying to understand something important. It's not just about you anymore. It's about everything that makes humans, well, human." John looked at her, unsure of how to respond. There was a part of him that wanted to understand the strange world that Exarax inhabited, but there was also a part that felt exposed, vulnerable. He didn't know what they were trying to uncover, but he sensed that the tests were becoming more personal. His emotions were no longer just private. They were being studied, mapped, and analyzed. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he admitted, his voice low. "Every time I try to relax or calm down, it feels like my body is responding in ways I can't control." Lyra paused, her heart tightening as she saw the discomfort in John's eyes. This wasn't just about science anymore. She had been so focused on her research that she had forgotten to consider how John was feeling in all of this. "I understand," she said softly. "But this is important, John. You're helping us understand something far greater than just human biology. This connection between mind and body. It's something we've never seen before. I promise you, we're not trying to harm you. We just need to understand it fully." John nodded, though doubt still lingered in his eyes. "I just don't know what you're trying to find. What are you looking for?" Lyra took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not sure, but I think it's the key to understanding how humans are connected to the world around them, how emotions, thoughts, and physical being are all part of the same thing." John's gaze softened slightly. It was clear he was still uncertain, but something in Lyra's voice, something in her sincerity, made him feel a little less like an experiment and a little more like a person. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll help, but I need to know you're not going to push me too far." Lyra nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was asking. "I won't push you, John. I promise. But I need to understand this, for all of us." She looked at him, her mind racing with the possibilities of what this discovery could mean. She had once thought she was the one doing the studying, the one uncovering the mysteries of the universe. But now, as she looked at the human in front of her, she realized that the true mystery might not be the body or the growth. It might be the heart, the mind, and the spirit that made him who he was. And that was something that Exarax would need to learn to understand if they were ever to truly understand humanity. The days in the research facility had begun to feel like weeks. The deeper Dr. Lyra delved into the mysteries of the human body, the more she found herself at a crossroads. Every test, every scan, revealed new and surprising truths about John's biology. But these discoveries were starting to have unforeseen consequences. It was clear now that what she and her team had initially thought was a simple anomaly was, in fact, something far more complex. John had become a part of this research in a way he hadn't expected. His emotions and reactions were no longer just data points. They were becoming part of the very fabric of the experiment. It wasn't just his physical state that was being studied now, but his inner world. His fears, his hopes, his struggles. His emotions seemed to have an almost tangible effect on his body, and at Exarax were beginning to realize just how deeply intertwined mind and body were in humans. As Lyra sat in her lab, reviewing the latest set of scans, her mind buzzed with questions. The growth in John's body had become more than just a point of interest. It had evolved into something far beyond their understanding. It was no longer just an organ or biological feature. It was an active, living part of him, responding to his every thought and feeling. "I don't know what to make of this," Lyra murmured to herself, staring at the data. "It's almost as if his body is speaking to us." The door to the lab opened, and Thal entered. He had been unusually quiet over the past few days, a sense of unease hanging over him. "Dr. Lyra, I think we need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with concern. Lyra turned toward him, her brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" "I've been going over the scans," Thal said slowly, "and I think we're at a point where we can't go back. The emotional reactions in John's body are becoming more intense. They're starting to affect his overall health. If we keep pushing him like this, it could have serious consequences." Lyra felt a pang of guilt. She had been so consumed by the quest for understanding that she hadn't fully considered the toll it was taking on John. She had always prided herself on her ability to remain objective, but now she was realizing just how much she had lost sight of the human aspect of this study. "You're right," she admitted, her voice quieter than usual. "But we can't stop now. We've learned so much already. If we can understand the way his emotions influence his body, we might be able to unlock something that could help countless beings, humans, and others." Thal shook his head. "But at what cost, Lyra? We're talking about altering the very essence of what makes him human. I know we've made amazing discoveries, but we need to think about the consequences." Lyra didn't respond immediately. She was torn. She had always believed that knowledge and progress were the highest goals, but now she was starting to wonder if that pursuit was worth the potential harm to John. "What are we doing to him?" Thal's question echoed in her mind, and she couldn't find an easy answer. Meanwhile, John sat in the examination room, waiting for the next round of tests. His nerves were getting the best of him. Each time that Xerax ran a new test, he felt more and more like an object. The growth between his legs had become a source of both physical and emotional discomfort. He had tried to remain calm, but the constant pressure of the research was starting to take its toll on him. His emotions felt out of control, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were reading him more than just his body. They were reading his mind too. The door opened, and Dr. Lyra entered, followed by Thal. John noticed the change in her demeanor. She seemed conflicted. "John," Lyra began, her voice soft, "we've been running tests on you for a while now. And I know this hasn't been easy. We've asked a lot of you." John looked at her, his expression tired but understanding. "I've done what I could. But honestly, I'm starting to feel like I'm losing control of this whole thing. My emotions, they're just everywhere. It's like I can't even trust myself anymore." Lyra's heart clenched. She had seen the data, but hearing it from John's mouth made it feel real in a way that nothing else had. The strain on him was visible. She knew that the tests were affecting him, and the guilt weighed heavily on her. "We're not trying to hurt you, John," she said softly, her voice filled with genuine concern. "But we need your help. We're on the brink of something huge here, something that could change everything we know about life itself." John took a deep breath, but his frustration was clear. "But at what cost? You're asking me to expose every part of myself, to let you see my thoughts, my feelings, and I don't even know what you're trying to find. I don't know what this is doing to me." Lyra felt her resolve waver. She had always believed in the purity of science, but now she was beginning to understand that there were things that couldn't be measured in data points. John wasn't just a subject. He was a person, and she had crossed a line by pushing him this far. Thal spoke up, his voice firm. "Maybe we need to reconsider the approach. We've already learned a lot, but we need to understand the human experience, not just the biology. Pushing him further could be dangerous." Lyra looked at John, who was visibly exhausted, and then back at Thal. For the first time, Lyra questioned her own judgment. She had been so consumed by the idea of unlocking a great mystery that she had overlooked the very real human being in front of her. "Maybe you're right," Lyra said, her voice tinged with regret. "Maybe it's time we take a step back and truly understand what we're doing." As the tension in the room hung thick, Lyra realized that the key to understanding the human race wasn't just in the data, it was in respecting the people behind the data. It was time to rethink everything, not just as a scientist, but as someone who was beginning to understand the deeper meaning of what it meant to be human. The research facility was quieter now, the usual hum of machinery replaced by an uneasy stillness. Dr. Lyra sat at her desk, her hands hovering over the console, staring at the data displayed before her. The numbers blurred as her mind raced. The past few days had been a turning point. She had seen something in John's eyes, something more important than all the discoveries and data. She had seen his humanity. After weeks of intense testing, the Xerax team had gathered more than enough information. The growth, the emotional connection between mind and body, it was all unprecedented. Yet, Lyra knew that the most important discovery was not about the physical or emotional reactions, but the lesson she had learned about human nature. The deeper connection between mind and body that had been revealed wasn't something to be measured, it was something to be respected. Lyra stood up abruptly, shaking her head as if to clear away the fog of doubt that had clouded her thoughts. It was time for a new approach. She had been so focused on finding answers, on solving the puzzle of human biology, that she had failed to see the bigger picture. John wasn't a specimen, and his emotions weren't just a data set. He was a person with his own thoughts, his own will, and his own rights. The door to the lab opened, and Thal stepped inside. He had been quiet lately, his concerns about the direction of the research weighing heavily on him. But Lyra could see a change in his expression now, a sense of calm, even understanding. "We need to talk," Thal said, his voice steady. About John. Lyra nodded, her expression serious. Yes, I've been thinking a lot about what we've done and what we've learned. I've realized that we've crossed a line. We've treated him as nothing more than a subject, a set of data, and I think that's wrong. Thal's face softened, and he took a seat across from her. I've been thinking the same thing. We've learned so much about human biology, but we've lost sight of what truly matters. John is more than just an experiment. He's been more patient with us than we deserve. Lyra sighed, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk. I didn't realize how much we were pushing him, how much we were asking of him. I thought I was doing what was best for science, but I started to see things differently. What we've learned, it's not about manipulating his body or studying his emotions. It's about respecting the person that John is. Thal nodded, a look of agreement in his eyes. He's been a willing participant, but he's also been forced into something that isn't fair. He's been patient with us, but we can't keep using him like this. Lyra's thoughts turned to John. She could still see the tiredness in his eyes when he had last spoken to her. He had trusted her, but that trust had begun to fray. She had asked too much of him. And for what? Knowledge, understanding. But now she realized the most important thing she had to learn was how to respect his autonomy. We need to make things right, Lyra said, her voice firm. We owe him that much. He deserves the chance to walk away from this without feeling like we've taken something from him. Thal stood up and walked toward the door. Then it's time we do that. It's time to bring him in and apologize. We need to let him go. Lyra nodded, her heart heavy. She had no idea how John would react. He had trusted her, but now that trust had been tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. Would he still want to help them? Would he still want to be a part of the research? She wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. It wasn't just about science anymore. It was about doing what was right. Minutes later, Lyra and Thal entered the room where John was waiting. He was sitting on the edge of the examination table, looking out the window, his face calm but tired. When he saw them, he stood up slowly, his posture wary but not hostile. John, Lyra began, her voice soft. We need to talk. John looked at her, his expression unreadable. I'm listening. I'm sorry, she said, her voice filled with genuine remorse. I should have respected you more. We've treated you like a subject, not a person. And I've lost sight of what's important. John was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. He seemed to be weighing her words, his emotions hidden behind a wall of calm. You were trying to understand something, he said finally, his voice quiet. I get that, but it's hard when you're the one being studied. It feels like you're being torn apart piece by piece. Lyra's heart sank. She had known that her actions had hurt him, but hearing it out loud made it more real than ever. We've made a decision, Thal said, stepping forward. We're ending the tests. You're free to go. You don't have to do this anymore. John's gaze softened, and for the first time, Lyra saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. Thank you, he said simply. There was a long silence before Lyra spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. We've learned so much, John, but we've also learned something even more important. Respect, trust, and empathy. These are things we never could have learned from a data point or a scan. You've shown us more than we ever expected. John nodded, the weight of the past weeks lifting from his shoulders. I just hope you'll remember that next time. Lyra smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. I will. As John left the room, walking out into the unknown future, Lyra realized that their journey had come full circle. What had started as a scientific mission to study human biology had evolved into a much deeper understanding of humanity itself. The lesson she had learned was simple but profound. Science was not just about discovery, it was about connection. And sometimes, the most important thing you could discover wasn't a theory, but the heart of the person standing before you. For the first time in weeks, Dr. Lyra felt a sense of true understanding. The Exarax had always prided themselves on their intellect and their control, but in that moment, Lyra realized that the true power came from the ability to connect, to truly see and respect the beings around you, and that was something no alien species could ever measure.